Well, welcome aboard, everybody, to Turpin Communications initial inaugural guest speaker series. We are so excited today to roll out this new concept for us. For those of you who know who Turpin Communication is, you probably know that we deliver a lot of training content via webinar open to the public. And we thought, hey, we have a lot of partner organizations and what we would call friendlies who have content that is similar to ours, adjacent to ours, but connects in one way or another. So we thought we should start this series, and that's what we're doing today. My name is Greg Owen-Boger. I'm the EVP of Learning and Business Development here at Turpin Communication. Joining us on the Turpin side, we also have Dale Ludwig, our president and founder. Say hi, Dale.
Hello, everyone.
Dale is working with a new headset today, so we're going to cross our fingers that his headset is working and he can continue to hear us and we can continue to hear him. We also have Kevin Vogelsang on the line today. He is our operations manager, and he's going to be taking care of us, making sure that we have a favorable audio and video experience as our virtual host. So our guest speaker today is a dear friend of mine, Daniel Lobb. He is the president of TRP Enterprises. That stands for Totally Responsible Person. How cool is that? He's going to be leading us through a session called Leading with Resilience, the Art of Bouncing Back. Before I turn things over to Daniel, though, I thought it would be interesting for you, for those of you especially who don't know who we are, to lay a foundation of the work that we do, so then you can see how Daniel's is adjacent to ours. And you can see the sun just popped out from between the clouds today. I'm being blinded through my window here. But anyway, here at Turpin, we are communication consultants and trainers, and we work with business people across the globe to help them be more effective presenters, meeting facilitators, and trainers. And I mentioned that Dale Ludwig here on the webinar with us is our founder. We're actually celebrating 30 years of being in business, and I'm old enough to say that I've been around for 27 of those. And one of the things that consultants do when they focus on one thing for a long period of time is they tend to write books. And Dale and I have co-authored a handful of ones. 3 of them here are on the screen: The Orderly Conversation, The Virtual Orderly Conversation, and Effective SMEs. And we focus in all of the work that we do on human connection. Again, that is one of the reasons that we've invited Daniel to speak with us today. So a little bit of housekeeping. We do encourage interaction, so please feel free to interrupt, drop questions or comments into chat. You can raise your virtual hand. Kevin, our host, will be monitoring and making sure that we don't accidentally ignore anything that's going on. And as we've mentioned, we do ask that you have your camera on if you can, because if you are in a meeting and you don't have your camera on, it's about the equivalent of standing in the corner with your back to everyone else. And you wouldn't do that in a live face-to-face situation, so don't do it today. With that said, there are legitimate reasons not to be on video, and we will honor that as well. And like this guy, he's distracted, but we would ask that you eliminate as many distractions as you can so that we can focus on this guy. This guy is a pilot, believe it or not. And I don't know, Daniel, if you're going to talk about that at all, but I always find it fascinating when you share stories of your piloting. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Daniel, I'm going to turn things over to you. Welcome aboard.
Greg, thank you very much. I appreciate that introduction. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. Nice to see some friends and to make some new ones today. Now that you sort of like tease this notion of a pilot, I'm in the back of my mind thinking, how can I bring that into this session? So I've got 90 minutes to figure that out. Welcome in. I'll tell you briefly why I'm here in addition to what Greg has just shared. I know a lot of us on the call are in some kind of training and development role. And I think I love that, by the way. This is not my first career. My first career was in a completely different industry. So I've spent the last about 15 years in adult learning, training, and development, which I thoroughly enjoy. But I think one of the things that I enjoy most about it is all of the material that I teach and facilitate is very much about the human connection. It's the social skills, it's the interaction, it's communication. And to do that effectively, it causes me to really practice that which I am teaching. So I feel like it's like my license to learn is being in training and development. So what I'm going to talk about today, the art of resilience, the art of bouncing back, is really, it's a very practically focused set of skills that all center on what's our mindset when it comes to dealing with adversity, with challenges, with disruptions. And do we have a mindset that's going to allow us to be resilient? So that's the kind of thing that I strive to practice routinely in my own life. Speaking of distractions, I am a father of 3 homeschooling, cyber schooling kids. I consider it successful if I can get through a Zoom webinar without some kind of photobomb happening in my window. So, you can give me a big congratulations at the end, should I get through the session successfully in that realm. I think that's all I need to cover in terms of any additional remarks about intro. One tool that I'm going to lean on today so that I can invite your participation is the annotation tool. So if you're not familiar with that, I'd invite you right now to scribble on my screen if you like, to play with the tools a little bit here. But you can find it under View Options at the top of your screen. There's an Annotate, and then there's a whole host of tools available to you. I'll probably ask you to use one of the stamp icons. Andrea's already playing with the text. Greg and got the hearts, the stars, wonderful. So I'll give you a moment just to familiarize yourself with those tools. And Kevin, my trusty guide on the side here, is also going to, from time to time, help me clear the annotations. It's not a knock on your artwork. It's just simply for the sake of learning that we have to continue our forward progress. So I will invite you to stamp on my screen from time to time. And then Kevin will help me clear those annotations. So with that, let me start out with data, because every meeting should start out with a little bit of data, right? I found this very interesting. And for those of you who are in the TD, talent development world, in the latest issue, or the October issue actually, of TD magazine, there was a great article with a summary from a study that Deloitte just did on the C-suite's role in well-being. And as I was reading through that and picking up a couple of pieces of data, I found that they directly connected to this presentation today. So I want to start out just by asking you a couple of questions to see if you can help me make sense of this data and see why it's so important, why it helps us make a persuasive business case for why resilience is necessary today. So let me ask you this question, and I'll give you the cue. This is where you can use some of the annotation tools. But one of the things that Deloitte covered is they first of all, they surveyed 2,100 people throughout the US, the UK, Australia, and Canada, and wanted to quantify several things related to well-being in the workplace. So this question here, what's the percentage of employees who say that improving their well-being is more important than advancing their career? So think about that for a minute, and then I'm going to ask you to just sort of vote using the annotation tool. So you can stamp anywhere on my bar here, and we'll say that the right end of the bar represents 100%, the left end represents 0, and then I've just sort of inserted a line here in the middle. So what do you think? You're Deloitte, let's just say for a moment here, and you're interviewing, thousands of people and trying to figure out, quantify, what percent of employees would say that improving their well-being is more important than advancing their career? So based on the input that we're getting, most of the results are greater than 50% at this point, right? See how my little bar graph works here? So cool. So you're really in the right neighborhood. Now, I'll also add on another layer, because they didn't just ask employees, they also asked C-suite executives the same question. So if you want to, this is like super complicated. This is the most complicated thing you'll do all day, by the way, is like try to point your mouse on this bar. But the second thing they asked is they asked C-suite executives the same question. So how many C-suite executives said that improving their well-being is more important than advancing their career? Just cast your vote, whatever you think it might be. And it really doesn't, I have no prize. There's no valor in getting this answer right. So feel free to take any kind of wild guess. But I will share with you, I'll take the cat out of the bag here. Here is what they found. So first of all, 68% of employees said they're improving their well-being more important than advancing their career, whereas C-suite executives answered 81% affirmatively to that. So what do you think? Does that surprise you? I mean, based on our votes, we actually, I would say we saw the reverse. We saw employees putting a higher and C-suite executives putting a lower emphasis on that. So I thought that was very interesting. Andrea, I see you've got your hand up. Question that you would like to offer to us?
Yeah, so I was curious on the C-suite question. Is it 81% of C-suite executives who are saying for them personally, it's more important to advance their career, or are they saying that's what their guess is what their employees would say?
Andrea, great question. I'm going to dig into the data, which I have right here in front of me. It's the leaders themselves, my
Themselves.
own
Okay,
well-being more important. Yeah, good
excellent.
clarifying question.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, so I'm also just going to give you one other tidbit from this report. And so, Kevin, if you can clear those annotations for me, I'll give you a related question. And so the second question is this: the percentage of employees who say they'd be more likely to stay with their company if it better supported their well-being. So the percentage of employees who said they would be more likely to stay with their company if it better supported their well-being. Okay, I like that. And then similarly, asking executives the same question. So would you, Mrs. Executive, stay with this company longer if it supported your well-being? Your votes on that. So I could see already we all think this is like super important, right? We're voting very high for these. And I'll share with you the answers as well. It's 62% and 82% on the exec side. So all of that to me is very compelling. I was personally surprised to read this, personally surprised to see the emphasis and the relative value that I'm going to generalize here and say that we as a society are putting on well-being as opposed to career advancement, if we have to choose between the two, right? And so I think if we're a leader, and many people on this call are, we're either leaders or aspiring leaders, people managers, or some of us have executive oversight in our businesses. I think that means that well-being is really important. And the article goes on to cite some solutions, and of course they have to do with training and development, right? That we can implement training programs that help people develop things like resiliency. Because I think there's a business case on this slide in particular. Hey, if we're an employer who shows that we care about your well-being, you're likely to stay with us. And we know that retention is a big deal in business today, right? And that a lot of us are saying, I want opportunities to focus on my own well-being. It's more important to me than that next pay grade or promotion or whatever the case may be. So if you're with me on that, let's dive into some strategies that can help us develop resilience. And I'm going to try to frame this in two ways today, both a personal strategy that you and I can use to develop our own resilient mindset, as well as how do I as a leader model, encourage, and foster similar attributes in others, whether that's in the teams that I lead or in others whom I influence in the organization. Makes sense so far. And so, Rue, good observation. I like that. I'm just picking up on Rue's comment in the chat. Maybe C-suite feel they've given up a lot of well-being to get where they are. It could well be. So let me move forward and share with you. We'll go from the data to the art. So Canadian poet Shane Koyczen said, if your heart is broken, make art with the pieces. And don't worry, the only art you will have to make today, you've already done. You've scribbled with Zoom and the annotation tools. Yay, you. That's all the art you're going to have to do. We won't push that envelope any further. But what I think this means to me is all of us go through difficulty, right? If you haven't done that yet, don't worry, it's coming. We all go through difficulty, through challenges. That's not the point. The point is, what do we do with it? So when I think about resilience, resilience is most commonly defined as the ability to bounce back. Though I think it's just a little bit more nuanced than that. It's not just about bouncing back. It's about what we discover about ourselves in the process of bouncing back. What did I learn from that? How did I get better as a result of that? Whatever that challenge, difficulty, change, whatever that was. So it's not just about bouncing back, it's bouncing back in a way that we don't just get back to where we were, but we're better off because of it. It's me version 2.0, right? And Richard commenting in the chat around, hey, how much did COVID influence the data that I just referenced? A lot, right? So this is a 2022 study. It's on the heels of the pandemic, and you can dig. It's a free report that you can Google. It's Deloitte's. I'll just bring that back up. This is the title of the report, The C-Suite's Role in Well-Being. So it's a free download that you can get from Deloitte, and check that out. All right. So resilience is about bouncing back in a way that we ourselves are enhanced through the process. Now, let me share how we get there. All right. So I'm going to give a little bit of framework, a little context, and a few phrases and terms that we can use in our session today. So first of all, I want you to just do a thought exercise with me for a moment. Remember the last time you were driving your car in rush hour. I'm sorry to bring up such a provocative memory so early in the morning here, but remember the last time you were driving your car in rush hour. Are you there? Are you with me? All right. Now, remember the driver who cut you off. You remember him or her or they? And what that felt like, okay? So just imagine we're driving down the road, minding our own business, obeying the speed limit, as I know that all of us would be doing, and somebody cuts us off. Now, the real question is, you can use your annotation tool for this, but when you're cut off, because everybody does this differently, what does your reaction look like? Could you stamp in the box that seems most appropriate, the box to which you are called? Oh, Dee's been working from home. It's been so long. I don't even remember. I am so envious of you. Yeah, so how does it look? So some of us, just an early pulse check here, some of us are verbal in our reactions, the shouters, the yellers, the et ceteras. I'm a little maybe underwhelmed at the number of people who gesture, but so it is. Got a few who ride their bumper, mentally note. And by the way, this is not like the most comprehensive list of reactions. There may be something else more colorful. Keep in mind just, the audience here, but put it in chat if you like. Depends if my kids are in the car or not. Kimberly, I love that, right? That implies to me, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but there's a context for this reaction. I might show some restraint depending on who's watching from the back seat. Frank, our town is too small. Frank is from Soldotna, Alaska on the Kenai Peninsula. Everybody knows your name, right, Frank? You got to be careful what you do on the highway out there. All right, so we all do it our own way. Interesting, just poking at this for a minute. It's interesting to me that no one fessed up to zooming around and cutting them off. That makes me feel so alone. I guess I'm the only one who does that. All right. Yeah. Ooh, Jennifer's got the teenage daughter. She's trying to teach some driving skills too. So she's hyper aware in the driver's seat, right? Or in the right seat, as the case may be. So my point for this, here's the real question behind the question here. How much thought does it take to react? And you can, I would love it if you would give me the verbal input or give me the input in the chat here. The reactions require exactly how much thinking? Right? And is there really any thinking, to Rue's quick on the zero key here, right? There really isn't any thought required to react. A reaction comes from that part of our brain that's wired for instinct, it's wired for survival. The emotion sends a chemical reaction and we act on it, right? So knee jerk for sure. So Kevin, if you'll clear the annotations, what I'm going to ask you to do, this is actually going to be a stretch for you folks, but I'm feeling pretty confident about this. I'd like you to help me flesh out some more sort of adjectives or descriptors for reaction. So we've got a couple in the chat. You're welcome to annotate on my slide or just pop it in the chat. But I'm going to turn my attention here. So it's knee jerk, very little thought, right? It's lizard brain. My thought comes from actually choosing my reaction to make it better. I like that, Jennifer, right? That's kind of where we're going with this. What other descriptors would you add to reaction? Knee jerk, instinctive. What else would you say? How would we describe reactions? Feeling, overthinking, the absence of thought. Exactly. second nature, right? Can be learned behaviors in that. The mindless driving, I'm realizing I probably should have chosen a different color for the background on this slide, but thank you for that. Depends on how your day is going, it's impulsive. So all of this is to say, thank you for this input, and I fully agree with you. I think the reactions are the things that we really don't give any focused thought to. We're not conscious when we're reacting, right? We don't have to think to do it. We're not really making a decision. Now, the reason I'm sharing all this, and the reason this is very simple, though it's really a game changer in terms of thinking about our ability to be resilient. Because if a reaction is thoughtless, impulsive, instinctive, knee-jerk, then what I'm going to say is a response is quite the opposite, right? Angela's saying we can train ourselves to think before reacting. Exactly. Exactly. We can train ourselves to think before reacting. So help me flesh out the descriptors of a response. So for example, somebody cuts me off in traffic. I feel there's a physiological reaction that happens in my body. You know, there's a pulse that's suddenly amped up. There's a breathing that's happening. I feel threatened. Though let's say in that moment, I just take a breath and say, all right, I need to be XYZ place by 10 o'clock. So let me focus on what I can control. In this case, my car, right? My vehicle. And I do not, a safe driver, make when I'm angry. So I take a moment, settle down. What I'm going to call that is a response. What's the key distinction there between reactions and response as you see it? Right? If the response is so impulsive, instinctive, etc., the reaction is, I should say, the response is completely different. And to Angela's point, we can train ourselves to think before reacting. So the response, I think, is really key. The ability to respond. It requires thought. It requires intention. There's purpose. It's kind of like the notion that somebody mentioned, is my child in the back seat? Is my child being trained to drive right now? In those cases, I'm going to be very acutely aware of whether I am going to react or whether I'm going to choose something deliberate, thoughtful, intentional. Right. Again, this is I don't want to oversimplify it, though I think one of the mistakes that we make, and I see it especially in leadership, we're often not attentive to the everyday decisions that we make, where we actually don't even make the choice. We just go directly from something happening and I'm reacting to it. And suddenly I find I've gone through the whole day sort of pushing that reaction out on others, taking it out on others, the behavior, through the silent judgments I may carry. And if you think about how often that might be happening in our day, I know it happens a lot for me. I practice mindfulness that I'm aware of those reactions and deliberately choosing responses. It really helps me make conscious, intentional choices. And so Angela's on it with the keyboard here, and I'm gravitating to those comments because they're popping up for me, and I hope you'll lean on the chat as well because it's giving me conversation points here, right? In front of others, even our reaction has to be stopped, our response measured, so the reaction doesn't have to be shared. So what I gather from that is, I'm going to kind of tease that out in terms of leadership. We have to be acutely aware of whether I'm expressing a reaction or a response, right? And the reaction itself isn't bad. We're not bad for having it. I think it gives us an opportunity to be curious about it. Why did I react in that way? What button in me was just pushed here, right? If we can be introspective along where are those reactions coming from, I think that gives us a lot of food for thought and opportunity for pause. And if we don't do that when it comes to handling change, adversity, difficulty, which is sort of our premise for resilience, we end up going through life, kind of like this, where life is just happening and we feel like it's beating us up. And this is the gift that's playing in our head over and over and over. This, my friends, is not yet resilient, right? We're not quite there yet. Where we want to go instead is treating difficulty, change, adversity as an opportunity for learning and growth. I'm going to look at whatever's going on with me as something I can learn, I can grow, I can discover something about myself with. So good so far. I'm not really pausing for questions, though. Your encouragement at the sort of onset was, hey, interrupt, right? Pop your questions in there, and we do have some time at the end. But how does this sit with you? Questions, comments you may make, please pop in. Good to see you on camera, Frank. Welcome in. I'm going to ask you to turn your attention while you're potentially generating any questions you have. I'm going to ask you to turn your attention to the handout. And Kevin, I have a favor to ask. I think everyone who registered received a handout with their registration. If you don't have it, Kevin, would you be able to put that in the, beat me to the punch. It's in the chat, ladies and folks.
He is one step ahead of you, Daniel.
I love it. I love it. So the handout is here. If you don't have the handout, it is not a game changer. It's just, it's a nice sort of job aid for what we're going to be going through here today. Because I'm going to ask you to turn your attention to it now, and I will share on my screen the questions that are on the handout that I'd like you to think about. So first of all, we're going to unpack mindset. So I'm saying resilience is a mindset. A lot of it has to do with our ability to respond, not just react. To figure out where you and I have opportunities along those lines, I have a few questions for you just to take a moment of introspection with. So the first one, what situations, and I'm going to invite you to think about this from a business context. So as you think about your professional role, what situations are challenges for me? In other words, situations that I have a hard time bouncing back from. Think about that challenging leader you work with. Think about that boss who, between you and I, we know is not qualified for the job. I didn't say that out loud, right? Think about the deliverables that you're tasked with. Think about the teams that you're leading. Thinking about, as a leader, the fact that you now have to be a psychologist, a payroll specialist, and the team leader all wrapped into one. Whatever it is for you. And you don't have to share this. This is really just for our own self-growth exploration. So think about situations that are challenging for me, from which I have a hard time bouncing back. Second question, I don't mean to walk you through this so progressively. I'll give you these questions, and then I'll be quiet. Second question, what personality traits and others do I tend to clash with? For me, for example, I am a collaborator. You tell me the vision, I will figure out dozens of ways to get there. I am not somebody who's directive. I'm not the person who's coming up with the vision. So I tend to bristle a bit with people who are very directive, very focused on where they're going, right? I think, whoa, hey, let's bring everybody else along. That's going to be different for all of us. So just think about those personality traits that you clash with. And then the final question, what do I do to refresh? What brings me strength? What are the personal practices that I do that help me keep my head in a level space? One that I do, actually, to Greg's earlier point, I've been a pilot for 15 years. I fly sometimes to get places. I also fly sometimes just because when I'm in the sky, the perspective and the quiet does something to my soul that is powerful. So I live for those opportunities. I may just do it once or twice a month, but when I get up there in that quiet, that alone, it's like a Zen moment for me. So what is it that brings you strength that helps you refresh? And you're welcome, as Angela has done, to pop any of this in the chat. Andrea has picked up on question number 3 here. Thank you for that. Love it. I'm just going to pause here for a moment so you have the space to think through some of these questions. And again, input certainly very welcome in the chat if you'd like to share it. Not at all required. Love the input about the strategies that help us refresh. The deep breaths, the walking, the writing it out, swimming. Angela, I don't mean to laugh. I love the way you phrased it. I have a hard time dealing with those that seem to lack even basic common sense. Yeah. So got a couple comments there around the things that are challenging. Okay, good stuff. Probably some common ground in some of these challenges. You are not alone. Cassandra, I'm a borrow from you, lighting candles. I love that. So some good stuff there. And keep it up. I'm gonna continue my talk here, though I'd love to see these comments coming in around both the challenges as well as the strategies that help us refresh. What I'm gonna add to this is that I'm gonna layer in another the real model, the real resilience model, if you will, and then you'll see why I've asked you these questions. They sort of seed the whole process that we'll work through with this model. So let me bring that in for you now. What I'm going to do is talk about this analogy of a building with multiple floors. A few of you have seen this before, if you've been in some training with me in the past. But this is a way for us to look at our emotional life, or how do I respond to challenges? And so I'm going to walk through each of these floors, and I want you to see how this might show up for you. This is on page 2 of the handout, and there's some space in there to take notes, not necessarily on what I say, but in what you think about that. And I'll walk through sort of the written part of that in just a moment. If you've got the handout in a digital form, by the way, it should be interactive for you as well. You can interact with the PDF. So let me walk through this building analogy, the different floors of it, and then I'll kind of revisit some of these questions and see if we can help make sense of that. So first of all, if we're going to start, we'll go from the bottom up. So we'll start at the basement level of this analogy, and we'll look at, well, okay, what is the basement? Right? I grew up, we were commenting just before the session started. I live in North Carolina, but I grew up in New York State, where we had legit basements. Y'all, forgive me for saying y'all, but in North Carolina, we don't have basements, we have crawl spaces. All right. So in a legit basement, at least in my mother's house, the only windows are like these little peephole windows at the very top of the wall, you know, where you can basically see dirt. That's how my mother's basement was, right? There's no perspective in the basement, which is analogous to our emotional life when we're faced with a challenge. If this is sort of our retreat space, I've got no perspective. I may have bottled up my emotions. I may have a storage of past events, and I may not be skilled at handling adversity. And Jennifer, I don't mean this so literally as that, right? Your basement's lovely. I've been to her home. She's got a great basement. It's not that. But if we think about this as an analogy for how we show up in the face of a challenge, this is not a real happy place to be. I mentioned my mother's house last 2 Christmases ago. We decided to clean out her basement at her request. This isn't like my project, my brother and I. But what we found in there, guess what was in my mother's basement? I mean, there are some of my father's old financial papers from 1986. There's like Christmas decorations that haven't been used in decades. You know, it's a place where we store things. And if you think about this as, again, an analogy, have you ever been in a conversation with I'm going to air quote this, conversation with somebody that's a little heated, and then some incident comes up, and all of a sudden they're like throwing at us memories from, oh yeah, well in 2008 you said, you know how that happens, and it's like, where did that come from? But if we have a memory of how that went before, and then we're back in the face of that challenge again, it can pop right back up. My dad's boots from the 70s. All right, so again, as an analogy, it's not a bad place. We all have a basement. It's just not the place we want to live, because it doesn't allow us to really face the challenge at hand. So let's climb up the stairs and look at what's on that first floor. Because the key difference between the basement and the first floor, if in the basement we're bottling it up and not talking about it, good news is on the first floor we're communicating. We're getting it out. Right? So here we're growing our skill at handling adversity, although one of the drawbacks is if we tend to just talk about what I'm frustrated about with anybody willing to listen, the consequence of that can be gossip, can be rumors, judgment and criticism. So on the plus side, we're communicating. You know, the disadvantage is we're not discriminate about with whom. Okay. And if you think about in our business cultures, we got an unhappy person airing their laundry, that can be a challenge. Richard, thank you for tweaking the analogy from the from the UK perspective there, right? It's the reverse. We'll have to rewire this thing here. All right, so let's climb up and look at the second floor, because here this is where we're really making progress. On the second floor, we're really growing our skill at handling adversity. We're no longer caught up with the if onlys. Oh, if only she hadn't said that. If only this hadn't happened. Real distinction on the second floor, we're accepting the circumstance that we're in. It's the old adage, this is the hand that I've been dealt. How will I play it? Right? That I don't want to just breeze by the significance of the acceptance of what is, because I think that's a big deal. We begin to really look at, here's what I've got. Doesn't mean that it's like we have to accept everything and just say, well, this is the lot I've been cast and I'll stay right here. You know, sometimes we have the wisdom to say, I need to change this situation. But we're really being very realistic here. And finally, we've got a lot more focus on solutions in this on this level. All right. And then in my experience and the way and this model is something that my team created based on personal experience of just working through challenges. I imagine it has an intuitive ring to you. So we're just going to play with this as an analogy. Your questions and comments are very welcome on it. In our experience, there's even a higher floor. And I will ask you, just even before I sort of reveal the text here, what captures your attention visually about the third floor? As you sort of compare this progression, we've now climbed up to this space that we're calling the third floor, where things are quite different. It's no longer, we've got, so Dee's talking about the wider view, the sunshine, the light, the open air aspect, that's how we try to design it, right? It's like the open air veranda, the patio. So it's the happy place. I think about it as a place, not necessarily that I am consistently located in, but it's that place that I tap into for creative possibilities. My perspective is expanded. I'm resourceful. I'm not limited by, what's happened in the past or even the way I've approached such problems before. So that makes sense so far, right? This is just a way to kind of evaluate, how do I show up in the face of a challenge? So I'm going to just pause long enough here. I appreciate the comments that you're offering here. Wow, Richard, a very personal sharing that I think means a lot to a lot of us here going through cancer treatment. Definitely stayed on the second floor with that. Good for you, and finding that as a way to stay there today. Thank you for sharing that. I'll give you a personal example as well. And by the way, here it is in aggregate. So here are all the floors, and this is on the bottom of your handout as well. So you have got the summary as well. Lisa, my condolences. By the way, the sun is shining here in North Carolina. It never snows here, but when it does, we sell out of bread and milk and heartbeat. So I will tell you. Cool. So Greg Scott, I'm going to respond to the comment here, and then I'll give you an example as well. Actually, I'm going to give you the example because I think it's going to address the comment. So I will tell you, this is, by the way, this is not just necessarily a 2020 horror story. This is the prelude to the story. We've all got our 2020 stories, right? We were all there. We remember what happened. But I will share with you this example because for me, it's a way to talk about this analogy. It was late March 2020, I think, when we got the stay-at-home orders, and we all retired to our living room and our favorite pair of sweatpants for the next 6 weeks or months or however long how long has it been now? Right. So I remember that with distinction, because I had a number of very pressing events, and I'm sure we all did, right? We all had stuff on our calendars. And I remember the unwinding of all of that very clearly over about a 2-week period. So I'm in the training and development business. My livelihood is fully dependent on getting in front of people and delivering training, all of which disappeared in about 2 weeks at the end of March and beginning of April in 2020. And as I looked out from a financial perspective at everything that we had booked on our calendar and started erasing all of it, some of that never coming back, we went through a process of 100% of our revenue generating activity being completely canceled. And while I pride myself on our ability to have pivoted, which we did immediately, got the webcam out, got the microphone, hey, ready to go. Our clients were way too distracted to entertain training and development. I mean, a lot of us were in that field. We know what that was like. There were way too many fires to put out. So that put me in a position of, my first step was I had a small staff. I laid them off. Then I suspended my own salary. And my wife and I had decided how we were going to manage the unknowable period of time for which I would go without a salary. And we're a single income household. I had an office that I realized I could not afford. Gave that up and moved upstairs. I'm in my illustrious home office, been here ever since, right? Made some major lifestyle changes, made some major changes to the structure of the business, and then found that I was given a gift of time that I did not anticipate. And for quite a while, really, I mean, I had time to kind of figure out, what am I going to do with my energy, with my talents? And it was a challenging period. And I did not love every moment of that. Truth be told, there were definitely moments where my wife can tell you, is like, hey, don't talk to Daniel right now, right? Like, you just let him be. And then there were moments where I needed to talk and kind of get some things off my chest. What I worked toward was finding what was meaningful for me about that experience. How did I want to grow from that experience? What is it I wanted to do differently, do less of, do more of, change, etc. That year, well, it was no banner year from a financial perspective, was a tremendous year from the perspective of growth. And I had to take the good with the bad, and come out in a place where I have rebuilt the way that we do business in ways that I truly love and bring me a lot of joy. And I'm very happy with that. And there are things that I've changed that I won't go back to. And so we've figured out how to make the business profitable again. I'm not on food stamps, don't worry, we recovered. But it was a real process of stretch and of growth. So I'm going to ask you, my friend, you can use your annotation if you like, and stamp on the screen any floor or floors that you heard present in the tale that I told you as I walked through sort of my personal and professional challenge of going through, the dumpster fire that was 2020. What floor or floors did you hear represented in that? Right? So I threw out I intentionally wrapped some key phrases in there, but curious. And if you want to elaborate on the theme, you're welcome to come up on the microphone or pop a comment in chat. Ooh, I love it. Somebody circled the whole thing. So stamping all over it. And I fully agree with all those comments, the resourcefulness, etc. So I think that's a good way for us to address the question. Is there fluidity in the model? Absolutely. And for me, in my experience, and I'm only sharing this with you to give the example of how this works, right? What the real magic is, what do you do with this? How does this help you face whatever is going on in your world? For me, it was a fairly long and drawn out process. It doesn't have to be the big things. It could be, it could be this project that needs to be done next week, and I'm feeling some kind of way about that, right? I may be in the basement about it. Maybe I've buried it in a pile of other priorities just so I don't have to deal with it, whatever it may be. But yeah, I moved up and down the stairs quite a bit, and I think that is a process. While I would not want to have to go through that again, it is absolutely part of my story now and not a chapter I want to erase because of what I discovered about myself and my own resiliency of going through that experience. So I hope that is a helpful and illustrative tale around the application of this model. Just want to make sure I'm pausing for any comments, questions that you may have. Appreciate what you've dropped into the chat, because my next step is to have you kind of really go to work with this and take a few minutes of introspection. So Jennifer, I'm just digging into your comment here. And if you want to expand on this, Jennifer, I'd be delighted to have you on the microphone. I wonder if the fluidity is based on the scenario or context of a particular situation. Professionally, I might be on the first floor, but personally might be on the third floor. Fully agree. Anything else you want to add to that, Jennifer?
I don't think so, but I wonder, that was just my wondering about, kind of going along with Greg's comment as far as the fluidity. Yes, you go up and down, but it might just be based on right now in my professional life, things might not be going great and I might have that first floor, kind of attitude, but, my relationships with my family and friends are amazing and I feel
Right.
very supported. And so and so then I guess the follow along with that would be, how do I take what I know to be true in my third floor of my personal life and apply it to my first floor in my professional life?
So I don't know the answer, but I love the question, and I think the question is the one to ask, right? And I think you're absolutely right. This is very circumstantial. This model is all about what's the current situation I'm facing, because it can show up for us completely differently in completely different situations. And some of us might be the exact opposite of what you just described. I think we have professional code of conduct in the workplace that allow us to be very effective second floor-ish kind of people. And then it comes to these very interpersonal relationships with the people we care deeply about, who know where our last nerve is. and it can be very different, right? So I think the key question that you identified in there is, how do I take what I know to be true in those experiences I've had where I feel like, hey, yeah, I'm up here 2, 3, etc. I'm nailing it, whatever it may be. How does that translate to those situations that perhaps are more nuanced or challenging for me? So I think the step that I'd like to ask you to take with me, team, is, again, if you'll turn your attention to the handout, and I'm going to layer in a couple of questions to this. So these particular questions are not on the handout, but I want you to, in essence, thank you, Kevin. Kevin is so on point. I want you to do a quick self-inventory here. You may choose, and what I invite you to do is go back to some of the criteria that you identified, 20 minutes ago when I asked you to think about what situations are challenges for you, where you find yourself reacting, find yourself struggling to bounce back. Again, my emphasis is the professional context, but I'm not. You can go personal wherever you feel like it's really relevant for you. And so you can sketch out, what do these different floors look like for me, and try to do this as real time as possible. Choose something that's hot, that's relevant for you right now. What does it look like for you on the different floors? And I would say particular emphasis on bullet point number 2 here. What does it look like on the higher floors? And then the other question is, are there any personal practices that help you climb the stairs? What are the strategies that you might use that help you climb the stairs? So I'm just going to, again, I'm going to pause. I'm going to be quiet for a minute or two, just long enough to kind of seed the thought process here with this. Questions, comments, welcome as you're journaling here. So my co-host moderator has put a very nice question in the chat, which I will not answer. I will invite your answers on. And really what I want to know is, where are you with this? And does anyone have an example you'd like to share? Frank talking about the order and discipline helps him climb. Love that, Frank. Um, Very interesting from Forrest, staying in the moment, slowing down, stop multitasking, right? All of us have multiple things we're dealing with, and sometimes we find our attention very splintered. And in such a mindset, it's so easy to react, right? It's rapid fire. Um, but I'd love anybody interested in coming up on the microphone and just sharing your comments. Greg, go right ahead, please.
Yeah, I've been trying to stay silent because I know that I want to moderate a Q&A a little bit later, but I kind of can't help myself right here. I've got so many thoughts in my brain. So this is the first thought, that I'm looking at this from a global perspective, and I can say, okay, in this period of my life, I was basically on the second floor, right? But I'm also thinking on a daily basis, I'm running up and down, depending on the situation that I find myself in. And, you know, I used to be an actor, and there were days when the last thing I wanted to do was go to the theater and get in my costume and put on that makeup and, you know, do a show. That wasn't always that way, but there were just days when I just didn't feel it. But as an actor, you owe it to the audience and everyone else in the cast and the crew to do your job. And so, you know, there's that 30 minutes in the dressing room where you are amping yourself up to get yourself onto the third floor so that when the stage manager calls places, you are there. And that is exhausting. And it's one of the reasons I left, because I just couldn't take that process anymore. So I don't know if that resonates with the work that you've been doing, but that's certainly what I was thinking. And I know that we have a couple other theater folks that are in the Zoom meeting today.
So I'd love for anybody else who resonates with that. So I resonate, you know, Greg, I'm not a theater folk, but I resonate with the fact that there are seasons in our life, and I think it's very interesting when we look back retrospectively, all of us, at different seasons and how we have shown up in those seasons. And then the fact, I think this also, for me, what you said also translates to leadership, because we owe it to fill in the blank, right? Yeah. We owe it to others, to the business, to whatever or whomever. And there are days where we are not feeling it, and we still got to show up and be present and do a number of things. And I think, to me, this model is all about self-awareness, because for every one of us, it's like we have our own uniquely designed house or building, if you will, right? Everybody has a different set of stairs that we learn to climb. And I think the positive around looking back is I see what is it I have done, to both yours and Jennifer's comments. What are the things that I've done that have allowed me to be really effective on those, as Daniel's calling them, those higher floors, right? And what is it that I can use from those experiences that help me stay in touch with how it is I'm going to function on some of the higher floors? So I don't know how well that addresses your question, but I think it's a very insightful observation. I'm turn it over to Laura Jane, who's got the hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on what Greg was saying in your response. Yeah, I have that all the time. And I have to, and I've trained myself to go to a place of answering my bigger why. Like, why do I do this job? Why do I need this job? Why do I want to be in this position, whatever the conflict or complication is? And it just allows me time, that gives me some time for my brain, because I'm a very reactive person. So that just gives my brain and my body time to say, right, I actually do love doing this thing. It's just in this moment I don't, you know, and breathing comes in, and taking care of my body and responding to what my body is saying comes into that answer.
Thank you for that, Laura Jane. I'm now going to try to turn my attention here to the chat, because there's some very insightful comments, and I appreciate the depth of these comments here. I think one of the things that has happened in the last 2.5 years is everything has become fair game in terms of questions. You know, well, do I really have to do it this way? Do I really want to do that? All of that's sort of out in the open now, right? We have all begun to look at life quite differently. which is why I'm passionate about this model, because I think it gives us a positive way to frame the things that are challenging for us and see what it is that we can do well that helps us make sense of the stuff that's challenging and find a path forward for a lot of things. So I'm just going to pan through the chat here for a moment. Thank you very much for these comments. I'm not going to read each of them, but we all have access to them here. Curious if anybody else would like to share examples. Appreciate those. You're welcome to do so on the microphone. Just how is this sitting with you? How are you seeing your application of it? The strategies that Greg mentioned around climbing the floors, what helps us get up? And Laura, Jane, your comments around recognizing that I'm reactive, knowing that I need to breathe, to pay attention to my body, to take care of my body. Those are the kinds of things that help us, stay more in that response mode and less sort of susceptible to the reactions. Good question there, Forrest, which I'm interpreting as a self-taught kind of question. How would the third floor me react to the situation, and keep that model top of mind? What would that look like, right? So here's the next question I will offer, team, and that is, again, this you can annotate on my slide here, and some of us have already answered this question, but I think this gets us back to the strategies. Because there are times where I'm in the thick of something and I really just need to kind of remove myself or do something that's going to get me in the right headspace, right? So for example, my spouse and I, we frequently take walks in our neighborhood. We never did that up until about 2 years ago when we realized, hey, why not? Right? We're both at home. We both have opportunity. We can carve out a little bit of time in the day. But we have found that those walks around the neighborhood, it's like we connect in with one another. We kind of get out of the busyness of what we're doing and the busyness of kids and all of that, and just have adult time together. And it's 20 minutes. But it's a strategy that I find when I come back to my desk. There's a different me present, and he's not so burdened by his task list. So I'll just put some images on the screen. Do any of these speak to you in terms of strategy? I know it's a little early in the morning for the glass of Merlot in the bottom left corner, but hey, I'm just asking the question. Do any of these speak to you? You can annotate on the screen here. Do any of these represent strategies that help you tap into that third floor space? Get that peace of mind. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. And yeah, Forrest, to your point, there may be, I just selected several items here that were meaningful for me. Yeah, the fluffy pillow. I missed that one, Carla, right? So what else did I miss? Put it in the chat, because surely there are some other things. To me, this is also part of climbing the stairs. It's like there are times I recognize I just need to do something for me. And I don't mean that to sound totally selfish, but hey, we do. We need to take care of ourselves so that we can go and be the great thing that we've promised to be to the rest of the world. Karate, kayaking, all except the exercise room. That's awesome. So, and then there are, more tactically, I think there are a number of things that I've learned to do that help me move from floor 1 to floor 2. So 1 being this sort of reactive, I'm communicating, but not real intentionally. One of the things that I've learned to do is I often don't say the thing I'm thinking. I'll pause long enough, that moment of silence can be quite golden. Especially when I have a colleague with whom I collaborate routinely on training projects. And there are moments where it's like we just want to get thoughts out. And then there are moments where I feel myself bristling because of the way that he said something, and I'll just not say anything. I'll just let that sit for a minute. And for me, that allows my reaction to settle just long enough to really hear what it is he said. And that's something I do routine. I really practice that. Just being slower to voice my thoughts. It helps that pause allows me to just think a little bit more. So good stuff here. I'm gonna introduce. We have just enough time, I think. Greg, if I can take another 5 minutes. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
So let me do this. There's one. This is on the handout again, and if you don't have the handout, I'm going to put it up on the screen. But I'm going to introduce a mindset tool. This is an additional layer to the conversation that I think can prepare all of us to think about where might I have opportunities to apply this model? Where might I have opportunities to grow my own sense of resilience? So this is page 3 in the handout. There is a forced ranking scale. There are contrasting statements left and right. The statements on the left might represent, hey, we haven't quite yet developed that resilient mindset, whereas the statements on the right are, I'm really demonstrating the resilient mindset. So the task I'd like you to do is choose either 1, 2, or 3, whichever statement you agree with more. So if the statement on the left best describes your mindset, it's a 1. Statement on the right, it's a 3. If you're in between, it's a 2. You're going to have to do some generalizing with this. Hopefully that's reasonably clear, because here is the tool. Again, this is on the handout. So I'd like you just to take a minute with this. Which of the contrasting statements do you identify with more? I'm going to be fairly brief with this, but a lot of this is food for thought. And I think it helps us see where we may have opportunities to grow from. Forrest has popped a great resource for us in the chat, by the way. Thank you for that. So I'm going to give you just like 2 minutes. You may or may not complete the whole thing here, but I do want to give you a moment with it. And if you do have questions on the tool, please chat me up or raise your hand. Give you just another half a minute with any of the reflection you're doing here. So as you're doing this, I'm scrolling through the chat, and I just wanted to pick up on one. I could pick up on all these comments. Greg, maybe you and I can dig into some of that in just a moment. But I think it was Rue who, and now I'm not finding it now that I want to call it out. But I think Rue mentioned the comment was something along the lines of, when we're in the basement first floor, it's easy to use confirmation bias to really take whatever frustration we may have and believe it to be the truth. And I hope I'm not, paraphrasing that in too far off of the intention of what you were writing. But I fully agree with that. I think in those lower levels, oh, thank you, Kevin. Gosh, Kevin just mind blown whole day here. Yes, right? Absolutely. I mean, it's so easy to, it's like we're fault finding with anybody, and then we're slapping the knee. I knew it. So I think some very, some astute observations here in the chat with all of that. Just to kind of tidy up this piece, any questions, any thoughts or ideas this brings up for you as you work through this mindset tool and just sort of having to choose one side or the other? If you really want to, I'm not a numbers guy, but you can absolutely total all this up and be like, oh, 3 times whatever. I don't know how many there are, 10 of them, 3 times. I'm a 30, yay me. Or if you're a 30, by the way, you're delusional. So,
I was actually just about to ask that. Is the goal to be a 30?
yeah, right. And really, the goal, like the score, is immaterial. I'm kind of making fun of it, but you can kind of measure growth if you like, because presumably we move from lower to higher. That's a good thing. The score is really immaterial. It's really about, where do I see opportunity to implement greater resilience? Where do I find myself on those lower floors and find that I would be better off if I could develop or implement a strategy that's going to help me move up those stairs, right? That's the real goal, the real intent of this. So let me do one more slide here, and then we'll just open it up for more general kind of Q&A. The last thing I will do, and thank you for that, Dee, just, middle ground is great, right? Because wherever we are is where we are. And I think we do ourselves a disservice by believing we're somewhere we're not, if that makes sense. So even if it's like, hey, I'm on the developing side, hey, that's awesome, right? It lets me be honest with me about where I am, and that's good, because then I can figure out what's next. Right. And sometimes I know myself, I have denied that that's not a struggle for me. Meanwhile, I'm fuming inside. So yeah, taking the inventory is a good thing. So, and D, cool. Like, hey, it's better than it was. That's awesome too. So here's the summary, my friends, that I wanted to share. This is a crucial time for resilience. I think the relevancy of this session that Turpin and I have put together for you today, I find this to me to be very timely, because this is such a y'all, this is a weird world we're living in. Is it just me? It's a strange world we're in. So resilience is a mindset that sees setbacks as opportunities to bounce back. And we all have different floors in our building that we're going through. Climbing the stairs is part of a personal practice of resiliency, self-awareness of what triggers me, what bothers me, etc. And what brings me strength is what allows me to climb the stairs. And finally, it's not just about bouncing back to where we were, but it's the enhanced version of me who emerges. And I think, Jennifer, your comment there is like apropos to this last point, right? We're all works in progress. We're all sort of implementing these strategies. And part of my intent today is to highlight where we are, what's good, what can we do more of. So I'll sort of pause on that point. I have a 9-year-old who's very boisterous in the other room. Hopefully that is not coming through my microphone.
No,
But
actually,
Greg,
it's not Daniel at all.
okay, very good. Greg, I'll invite you to hop on and sort of pull in the moderation piece of this now.
Yeah, well, thanks for introducing us to your work and this model. It's so super interesting to me, and I'm going to try to connect a few dots from the work that we do in this and see. Let's just see where this conversation goes. While I am doing that, though, I invite all of you to continue to ask questions, poke at comments, because we want this to be as rich of a conversation as possible for the next 20 minutes or so. So, oh man, we work with a lot of leaders here at Turpin Communication, and in working with them, building their leadership communication skills. And you might think of it as executive presence, but it's not just about someone's presence. It's about how are you able to be intentional about how you show up with other people and provide the guidance, the vision that they need in order to get the job done, to meet the mission of the organization. And we talk a lot about inflection points, right? An inflection point is that moment where the bottom falls out and change is inevitable. And it might be a very quick inflection point, or it might be this long drawn out thing. We had a very big one with COVID, right? And we looked around and we're like, where are we heading here? And every leader came up with a different decision and backed off of decisions and went down new tracks. And so there were lots of those little inflection points in the world of this big one. And I can't help thinking when we think about the house and the different layers, that some leaders out in the world got it right? They were able to have a really bad day. For us, it was Friday the 13th in March. That was the worst day professionally I've ever endured. But we had to, dig ourselves out of the basement, as you said, and try to turn around. Now, our response to the pandemic was much different from yours. I don't think it was better. I think it was just different. We had a really bad day, and then we had a really bad weekend, all of us, and we pulled the team together on Monday morning. We did a little bit of research. We discovered that only 3% of our revenue had ever been delivered in any calendar year virtually. Even though we have been a virtual company for years and we've been teaching virtual communication, it was a very tiny sliver of our income. But we had to pull together, and Dale and I decided that there would not be any layoffs. That was incredibly important to us. Our team is made up of human beings, and we couldn't see a future without our team. So that was a given. And so we needed to figure out, what are we going to do to be able to make that happen? We took salary cuts, of course, like so many people did, but we were able to bring the team together, get us on. I think probably we started maybe that Monday on the first floor, but within the week we were on probably the second or the third floor and turned the business around. So I wish I would have had this model then. I bet you hear that all the time, right?
Sorry, muted, but yes. And Greg, I appreciate that, because you and I, and I'm not like telling any secrets here, but Greg and I had several sort of mutual support calls with Dale during the sort of midst of that pandemic. And
Yep.
we definitely made very different choices that were true to our values, right? Our company's values, our personal values. And yeah, I think it's very interesting, not to be too, well, I mean, this is philosophical, so I don't know why I'm trying not to be philosophical with it, but it is, your point around some got it right. I think from a business perspective, a lot of companies, leaders, et cetera, really responded in exemplary ways, and some not so much. And I think that just kind of is what it is. I think, to me, what's very interesting about it is the 35 or so of us on this call today, we're all in very different places, completely different industries, different parts of the country, different places emotionally, mentally, with whatever's going on in the world. I think there is tremendous power in each of our hands in terms of what do we do next. And I get excited about this model and these kinds of things, because I think we sometimes dismiss the agency that we each have. We don't recognize that we do have a lot of personal power to exercise when it comes to just how we handle challenging things. And I love, that's why I kind of zero in on that part of the second floor that's all about accepting what is. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to like eat it for breakfast or whatever, but the moment that we're like, that's the reality I'm living in, then that puts us in the position of choice. So what am I going to do? So, yeah, please.
If I put that back in the world of COVID, like, the acceptance of what are we in, there was so much fear, right, in the world for some of us a few weeks, for some of us months. Yeah. And like, how do you, in those moments, how do you accept what is when you can't even define what is, right? Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, and so I have all of the answers to all of these questions, but I think part of it is sometimes we can't, right? Sometimes it's not a snap of the finger. That's why when I think about the third floor, to me, I often describe it as the place I tap into. I have practices that I do. I have quiet time that I take in the morning, and what I'm really trying to do is set an intention for how am I going to be, through the balance of the day. And I find those are the moments where I'm really trying to tap into it. And a lot of life I'm kind of trying to remember what that space is like, but I think that's part of the process too.
Yeah. Dale, I saw that you went off mute. Did you have something to add to that?
I did, but I don't remember what it was because I was listening to you. So if it pops back into my head, I will bring it up.
I feel like I just dumped you in the basement all of a sudden. Sorry about that. Which is actually a really good segue
Maybe
for where I wanted. What's that?
Maybe you said what I was going to say. That could have been what happened.
Okay, I'm not sure I've got that good of a crystal ball, but anyway, let's take the conversation a little sideways. We talked about the work that we do with leaders, but we also work with people who are intensely nervous when they are speaking in public, whether that's just, an everyday presentation or a high stakes sort of thing, or even a one-on-one with their managers. And the reason I asked about the fluidity and the big picture, and then like how do you move through it throughout the day, is I was thinking, man, some of the people that we work with, we ask them, on a scale of 1 to 10, how bad is your nervousness when it kicks in? 1 is nothing, 10 is I'm about to pass out. And a lot of people will describe an 11.5, right? I mean, it is intense fear that they are experiencing, and that is not to be judged. I think we can all understand what it feels like to be in that moment where you just cannot catch your breath, you cannot grab a thought. And so I'm wondering, like, can we apply to working through nervousness in this house, right? You're nervous that it's an 11.5, you're in the basement. What do you do to climb yourself out? And we always talk about taking a moment to pause and breathe, gather your thoughts. But then the other piece of that is really connecting with people through solid eye contact, because even though the people might be part of the problem that are, causing the nervousness, there is a human connection that happens when you're intentional with looking people in the eye, in addition to taking that pause to breathe and think. And then they can slowly pull themselves up onto the first floor, and then maybe even over time find a way to be comfortable in speaking in front of other people. So have you ever had people make that connection?
You, Greg, are the first, and I will. Well, I'm thinking about it through that focus of nervousness, and So I think I've probably heard that connection before. I'm really in that space of how do you deal with nerves or something that is inherently scary to me. Right. Fear of public speaking is like, greater than death. So what I keyed up on though in that, Greg, what really caught my attention is when we talk about reacting. So we distinguish between reactions and response. What we didn't really define is the fact that reactions are almost inherently self-focused.
Yeah.
I am afraid something is going to happen to me. You did me wrong, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas the response is not that it's not self-focused, but there's space for more than just me in the response. And so when I heard you talk about eye contact being an antidote, I wonder if an element of that is it takes me out of this is my world and there's nobody but me in it. And now I'm inviting you into this world. I'm looking you in the eye. And it's no longer about me, but it's about this connection. And what do you need? How can I interact with you? So I wonder if that's a big part of the significance of that eye contact, because I think it does when there's space for two. That's responding, not just reacting.
Yeah, exactly. And we talk about it as when you are engaged. We've hit that moment of when you're connected with people, you're engaged, you're able to think on your feet, which means then you're able to be intentional with how you move forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Richard commented on
let me
fear
jump
and
in
the
here.
energy of it. Go ahead, Dale. Go ahead.
Okay. Which reminds me, we had a couple of workshops with some of the smartest people we've worked with. I'm sure, well, okay, not smart, but just incredibly insightful people about facilitating meetings and that sort of stuff. And I started writing down the things they said because I thought they'd turn into nice blog posts. But remember, Greg, the guy who said anyone could be more effective with time, meaning in the moment, think, make a decision that moves from reaction to response and take hold of it. Sort of another guy said, well, it's like shifting gears, coming out of your autopilot and into, sorry to mix the metaphor, and trying to way to connect with the people that you're talking to. So it resonates so much with what you've been talking about, Daniel, because so many things on the different floors are like, in the moment. What are you feeling
Yeah.
right now? And it's fascinating to see it. I love the floors and the
Yeah.
basement. I don't love the basement, but the concept of the basement is really interesting.
Well,
Yeah, and I think, go ahead,
no,
Greg,
please
please.
go, Daniel.
I was just going to say, I think I like the model as well because it gives us permission to be both in the moment as well as aware of the moment, right? And I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, what I was going to say is naming it, like being in tune with it enough to name it. It's, I think when once, at least for me, once I can name the emotion I'm having, then I'm better equipped to deal with it. I want to share a couple of slides. As you were talking, Daniel, I kind of put together a mini presentation of my own because there's another connection that I want to make, and I want to invite all of you to a webinar where we're going to do that. But anyway, as I established earlier today, we are delivering webinars quite often. We're taking December off because we deserve it, but we're going to be back with bells on in January with a session called Leadership Communication in the Virtual World. I'm going to zoom in here on this. That is going to be on January 25. The one I want to really focus on, though, is the following day. It's called Feedback Without Fear, and it's about coaching people on their communication skills. One of the concepts in this particular article is why ought we as leaders be providing feedback to our direct reports, even though we might feel a little bit of fear about doing it. And you started today with some research, and I'm going to show you another bit of research. This was in TD Magazine back in, I don't know, earlier this year. But the research was completed by Quantum Workplace, and it's about turnover trends. So it says disengaged employees are flight risk, and workers want growth, flexibility, and communication. Just in the same way they want the well-being that you had talked about, Daniel. Employees want to feel connected, and they want to feel that their managers have their back, particularly around communication. So the number one reason that employees are leaving is around poor leadership communication from their direct reports. And they say that 35%, and I would say only 35% of existing employees said they experienced transparent communication throughout all levels of the organization. So when you layer that on the well-being thing that you had talked about, is there any question why there's the Great Resignation has happened over the last couple of years?
Right.
You know, so anyway, I bring this up because we will be talking about how can we ensure that our employees stick with us, because employees are leaving managers. They're not leaving their job, right? We've all heard that. So I will not beat that commercial any longer, but I do hope that many of you are able to join us, because it's a really excellent piece of content that we've got coming up.
Really good stuff, Greg. I love I love the correlation, and I appreciate the synergy here with the work Turpin is doing, the work TRP is doing.
Yeah, I'm curious. TRP, the totally responsible person. Where did that come from? Because it's kind of cool, but I noticed that you don't lead with totally responsible person. You lead with TRP.
Yes. So it's kind of one of those things. We're actually also, despite my obvious youth, our company is in our 25th year next year. And it's one of those things that I wasn't in the room. So I joined the business, as a trainer 15 years ago, and then eventually bought the company. But it was one of those things where it just came up like totally responsible person. Because what we really mean by that is we're taking ownership for our decisions, right? It's not anybody else's choice but mine how I'm going to be. And I talk about the fact that a lot of us sort of dismiss our own agency and our power, and we get into kind of this victim mentality, thinking that others have done things to me, which might be legit. Though in the end, what I do with it is on me, right? So that's where the idea of a totally responsible person comes from. It is a long thing to say, so TRP is just short and succinct, and it leaves people wanting to know more, which is where we try to go from a marketing perspective.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, I cannot thank you enough for joining us today. I will speak for my own level of enjoyment over the last 90 minutes is that we hit we accomplished what we set out to do with the guest speaker series. So thank you for being our first one, and I'm pretty sure you're going to be invited back. So just keep that in mind. We talk about the reason we started a few minutes late this morning or this afternoon, this evening, wherever you are from, is because people have to get out of the previous meeting. They have to swing by the refrigerator, the bathroom before they get loaded into this meeting. We have come up, this is not earth shattering, but we have come up with a best practice, which is end early, which is what we're going to do right now, because you need time to do those things before you get into your next meeting or whatever it happens to be. So you've got 3 minutes to get to do that. And we will stick around and entertain any final questions or comments that you have, but we also want to give you the opportunity to take off. So Kevin is going to drop a couple things here into chat, particularly the registration for the upcoming webinars. Kevin, it's in the notes section of my PowerPoint. If you don't have that handy, you can drop it in. And there he is. Of course, he has it
There
handy.
it is.
He doesn't need me to tell him where it is. So anyway, thank you all very much. Dale, I don't know, do you have anything to say to wrap things up as well?
No, just thank you. This was great.
I do see some
enjoyed
questions
myself.
about a recording. Yeah, there will be a recording. We're going to be sending you an email, and I'm hoping that we can get the recording squared away so that we can give you a link. If not, we are going to send you a link to where the video will eventually be.
Thank you all, and great to see so many friends here.